Back to our panel. It's not easy being unemployed, and it can be challenging to get work. And many people will say to me, and I think the CEO mentioned about the shoe in the shoebox, how do you get that foot in the door? So I'm just going to ask the panel maybe to give some advice as to how to get the foot in the door.
I suppose just going back to our recruitment process. So the first thing from a recruitment perspective for our company is you have to apply online, and I just mentioned that before. And you have to do a behavioural assessment, which takes about an hour and a half. Then what I would advise after that, so you do your behavioural assessment, what I would advise after that is to find out the name of the hiring manager and then contact them directly. I know that it reinforces and keeps people on my mind when people ring me directly and say to me, you know, I've just applied for a position, and just to let you know that I'm still interested. So that definitely reinforces. So that's the first thing I would say. I would say if you're successful enough, well, just for our company as well, you don't necessarily have to have experience. So that puts a lot of people off. As well, somebody talked earlier, that lady, about maturity. I'll tell you a story. Somebody came for an interview last week with me, and they were a mature person, and they lived locally. And I said, my goodness, I said, we're open for 7 years. Why have you never applied before? Well, I just thought I was too old. That's exactly what they said to me. And I was shocked because I didn't realise that that's what people thought. It doesn't matter what age you are. If you have the right attitude, you'll be brilliant in hospitality. So that's the first thing. Don't be put off about not having experience, or don't be put off about what age you are. We value age and maturity as much as we value youth and people that don't have much experience. What else could people do when you're coming for interview? There's a lot of stuff. So many people come in to interview and don't have any knowledge of the company. And that's one of my questions. What do you know about the company? That shows you've had an interest in the position and the role. And I'd say 85% know nothing. Now, how does that look as an employer? That you haven't taken the time to even research about the company. In the first couple of seconds, whether we like it or not, we make an assumption about you when we meet you. Grooming. First impressions. Massive.
Now,
You
Catherine,
need to come. Yeah.
I know you have certain policies around tattoos and piercings.
Yes.
And they're very popular these days with young people.
Yes, so what I was going to say then is, if you have a tattoo, cover it up. And if you have a lot of piercings, don't put them in for the day. It's all about what you look like. Because you might be a very nice person, but I've only got a couple of minutes to know what you really like. Isn't that right? So how you look is going to really influence how I think about you. So you need to come on your A game. So you need to be dressed to perfection. And then when you meet me, the first thing you need to do is what? What's the universal welcome? Smile. Yeah, absolutely. You need to make eye contact, and you need to give me a good handshake, and you need to know my name and say, good morning, Catherine. Because you'll know you're coming to meet with me, because I'll have already told you that. And these are so simple, but so many people just don't get them. I have made you've made such an impression on me in those first couple of minutes, you're going to have to do something major bad later on not to get the job. And that's the truth.
Okay.
Yeah, the other portion that I would just add on to that, and it's again a lot of similarities between when somebody approaches a company like us to look at a job opportunity. But the other thing is, you know, a great way to find out about the company is go talk to somebody who already works there. You'll garner a huge amount about it. You'll actually find out whether you want to work with the company or not through that mechanism. And practice the interview with somebody else. You know, don't just roll up and think, oh, you know what, an informal chat and it's going to be this. Because remember that if you're sitting outside the door and there's 10 other people sitting beside you, you're in competition with each one of those 10 to get the job. And you need to view it like that. You need to view it like it's a game, and it's a game to be played. And the best way to play the game is actually get practice. they're the other points that I would add on top of what Catherine said.
So to win the game, you've got to practice. Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, I would say too, you know, that a good way of finding out what jobs are actually out there is if you have an interest in a particular company or in a particular area, find out who the employers are and go to their website, because you'll find a lot of the time that employers find it cost prohibitive to go through, we'd say, recruitment agencies, even advertising in the paper. So that's not necessarily the place to start to look for a job. You know, do your homework on the internet, jump on, get onto the company's websites, go to their career section, see if there's jobs there. And that's an area that you know, a lot of people don't necessarily tap into, you know. And there may not be as many CVs for that position as you would think, because you have to actually go actively looking for it. The second thing that I would say, and this is personally from sitting on interview panels, is that when you do apply for a job, you need to have a good, well-drafted cover letter and a nice-looking CV. It doesn't have to be an extensive CV, but it should be well laid out and well presented. That's the first thing. That'll most likely bring your application to the surface, as opposed to somebody who has put in absolutely no effort or little effort into it. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is when you do send in your CV, you know, you may or may not get a reply, and it can be frustrating that for somebody looking for a job if they don't get a reply, because they don't know, they don't even know if the company got their CV or not. So the next thing I would say would be, you know, if there's a deadline on applications, make a phone call and try and speak to whoever it is that's in charge of the recruitment, and ask them if they got your CV. Because that'll, you know, and that'll in a lot of ways it'll force the person to look for your CV, and again, that may bring it to the surface as opposed to other applications. You know, now in saying that, there's a fine line between, you know, ringing and making a nuisance of yourself.
Sure.
You know, and
Stalking.
and bringing your CV to the surface.
Okay.
You know, so an initial phone call maybe to whoever's in the recruitment or whoever's in HR to see if they got your CV for starters, and when they will be notifying people if they're successful or for an interview or not, you know.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a lot of things that we can do to get ourselves in the driving seat, be it a bit of research, going on websites, getting a good CV, and making the direct contact. The direct approach and personal approach seems to work. Now, there's kind of mixed press these days about job bridge and internships and work experiences. What do the panel view, see the value of work experience or internships or probation periods or job bridge?
Yeah, we actually don't we don't use job bridge or internships ourselves, because the investment in time, it takes us a year to take somebody from who has no qualifications to make them to making them a value add. So we actually create permanent employment rather than work with job bridge. But that's a local choice that we've made. But actually, I actually think these programs, again, you know, they get a lot of negative press, and I actually think the negative press is unwarranted, because again, remember the point that I made originally is that, you know, when you get employment, view it as your opportunity to set your skills, to sell your skills, to garner more skills when you get through the door. And a lot of the time, you know, people base their judgment on job bridge and these programs based on the early phases of their interaction and what they've been asked to do. And a lot of the time, when you first join the company, you're going to be asked to do tasks and activities that, again, you'll view as being beneath you. Again, view those as a test, as an opportunity to show that you have skills that are way beyond that. And I think personally, if you get into it with that approach, that the company will see the value, and then you'll progress much quicker, rather than going through the door and saying, you know what, this is a load of crap. You know, they've asked me to do, you know, photocopying, or they've asked me to make the tea, or they've asked me to do something really menial, and having that negative approach. Again, be easy to work with.
Okay, so be easy to work with. Now,
Yeah,
Declan, you were on a job bridge program.
Well, it wasn't. I mean, I have a personal experience in this area myself, but it wasn't a job bridge. It was kind of before the job bridge came in, but frustrating at the time, because I qualified as a solicitor and spent 2 years basically working in general practice, you know. Then when the recession hit, that whole sector was hit hugely, and job losses all, right, left and centre. So it was a difficult time. So I actually went back and done a course and got in with the company on a type of a job bridge sort of route. After 4 months, the employer decided to hire me on a full-time basis,
Mm-hmm.
So it was a positive experience for me, but what I would say to people is, if you're thinking about doing a job bridge, make sure it's in an area that you have an interest in and it's something that you want to do, and that there's light at the end of the tunnel in terms of progressing down that avenue. There's job bridges out there. I'd imagine that that there's possibly very little avenue for bettering yourself after the job bridge is over. And the key thing with job bridges is that there's a job at the end of it,
Sure.
or there's prospects of getting a job with a different employer at the end of it, given that you've got experience in that area. But the key thing is, you have to have an interest in it and a focused career path ahead of you, or
Yeah.
But again, saying that once you get in the door somewhere,
Right.
your career could open up in different directions, as it did for me.
Yeah.
Um,
So we're back to interest, having an interest, being strategic, and having the right attitude.
The thing too, for me as well, is, and I agree with all those points as well, but what people need to look at in terms of their career is they need to look at it in a portfolio of skills they develop over their entire life. And we talk about, again, we talk about job bridge and we talk about getting a job and we talk about formal. People view it as, getting a job is going to work for big companies like us or like Solus or having a career. But just use an example for myself is one of my first jobs after I cut Dervla's granny's grass is one of my first jobs was I worked in a petrol station, and that was perhaps the biggest impact I had in the early phases of my career, because I don't know how petrol stations work today, right? But back in those days, right, you had to make the numbers add up at the end of the day, right? You had to take the numbers that were the amount of litres you sold, and you had to multiply it by the value of each litre, and you come up with the amount of money you had in the till. And that was the biggest impact in one of my earliest phases, and I still use it to today, because it doesn't matter what I do, the numbers have to add up, right? So that's something that happened, I won't say how it happened, but it happened many, many years ago as something that I had to do. I have a job that people would view as pretty menial, right? Serving petrol in a petrol station, but I now use it today. And it's important when you're talking to future employers or you're doing interviews, and do your research and then figure out, what parts of your career you have to date, what part of jobs you've done already, or perhaps clubs or voluntary work that you've done that will have a direct impact. Because, again, employers like us can't go out and hire for the job. We're hiring capability, and capability comes in many formats.
Okay, thank you. And you're dealing with bigger numbers these days.